work is part of life, right? So there's no balance. It's have a really good life and figure out how to balance your personal life, your professional life, your religious life, your whatever.
Yes.
All of those things are part of life.
Hello, everyone. Today, I have a very special guest. His name is Flynn. He has collaborated with Alan Mulally, pitched Steve Jobs, accomplished much, failed often, and learned many useful lessons for 30 years of studying the science of success. Now, as you guys know, this episode or this podcast is about people with their success habits and going behind the scenes to understand what makes them successful. And today, we are very, very fortunate to have Bill on here to share his amazing knowledge with us. Hi, Bill. How are you doing?
Hey, Joey. I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on. Looking forward to it.
Thank you so much. When I saw your bio, I was like, oh, I need to get this guy on my podcast. He is going to be so valuable to the audience. Can you tell people a little bit about you?
Certainly. So I sort of had two arcs to my career. My first was startups. I did 10 different startups in high tech over about 25 years.
Nice.
Did pretty well. I'm either 5 for 7 or 5 for 10, depending on how you count when I was there, not there, and that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Either way, a decent track record. Most startups fail. So I've definitely helped many people become millionaires. I was generally in sales or the head of sales, so I think I contributed directly to a lot of people's wealth. Unfortunately, I was not really one of them. I still have to work for a living, but I loved doing them. And then about 5 years ago, I decided to become a coach. I had a really interesting experience between startup 5 and 6. Mm-hmm. And I really became a coach, and it was such a wonderful experience. I tucked that in the back of my head a little bit. And after 4 failed startups in about 6 years, I said, you know what, maybe we should look at something else. So I decided to do this, and I'm so glad I did. I now know what a calling is for real. I knew what it was intellectually, but it's such a wonderful thing I get to do every day. The time flies when I'm with my clients. It's such a blast. So I'm really, my only regret is that I didn't do it sooner.
So what made you decide to start doing that, to get into the coaching? What was your starting point for that?
Yeah. So after startup 5, my wife and daughter at the time said, hey, do you need to do a 6th right away? Because they consume you, and this was probably over 12 years, 12 or 13 years I had done the first 5. And I was the head of sales and marketing. So it's also one of the hardest jobs in a startup, besides also being in a startup. So I said no. I said we had done pretty well. I was 4 for 5 at that time, and the last one was a disaster, and it was really terrible. So it was nice to take a break. So I took a bunch of time off. It turned out to be 10 months, and but while doing that, I was asked to, my friends knew that I was free and available, so they would call me and say, hey, Bill, I hear you're not working, and would you mind, and can you help me with this? And so I did some stuff for free. I get some stipends, I got some stock, I just sort of did it for fun. And I said, I'll help you. I said, but I have one rule. I will only work from 10 to 2 Monday through Thursday, because I'm basically off. And if you're okay with that, then let's do it. So they were fine. And one of them was a startup that I ended up taking over. This guy, I got introduced to him by an old friend of mine. That was his sort of part-time CFO. And he said, this guy really needs a lot of help. Yeah. Can you come in and sort of help him out? And I met him, and he was a decent guy, and he was tired. He's like, I'm just tired. He says, I want to sell this thing. He said, can you come in and just make me look as big as possible? Because I want to sell this thing. Yes. So I said, sure. So I came in, I put in some sales processes, I hired some people, we did some stuff. Yes. And actually like 10 or 11 months later, he sold the business. Not for a huge amount of money, but over $10 million. So,
that's decent.
He was set for life.
Yeah.
Right. And decent. He owed 95% of the company, I think is his. So he's fine. I talk to him every now and again, and he's like in the Philippines now doing volunteer work or something. I don't know what he's doing.
That's awesome.
So I was asked to take over. So he said, I'm out. And then the CEO of the company that bought us, which was about $100 million organization, bought us, said, why don't you take over? He reluctantly had me take over because he didn't like salespeople. But I'm not really a sales guy. And, I ran the business on a spreadsheet. I ran the business with the numbers. And he's like, I like that. So I did that. But the first day I took over, which was January 2nd, 2009, which was the best and the worst day of my professional career. When I took over, so we had 7,000 customers, give or take. Business had been around for years.
Yeah.
And it was an email hosting company before Gmail wasn't even a thing yet.
Wow.
And then neither was Office 365. This was actually the precursor to Office 365. So we were partners. We were Microsoft partners, and we sort of hosted. We used their technology and hosted an outsourced email hosting company. Mostly for small, medium businesses. Our customers were small, like 5 or 6 mailboxes was about this average size. But the first day I took over on that day, the entire technical infrastructure collapsed.
Oh no.
So we basically didn't deliver email for 2.5 days. I lost 1,000 customers immediately. This is my first day, remember, first day. And then I spent the next 3 or 4 months trying to save my partners. I had some huge partners. Ingram Micro was a partner. Ingram Micro is a huge technology distributor.
Yes.
A company called Endurance, which is the company that bought Constant Contact a couple of years ago. I mean, these were billion-dollar companies. And so I and my president of the bigger company had to go around and say, please don't leave us. We're fixing it and that kind of stuff. But I had 60 people working for me. I had thousands of other customers. And so I'm like, what am I going to do? So I basically cobbled together something, which looking back, I made up my own system. I didn't realize there were other business operating systems out there. I wasn't smart enough to know that yet. But I had 2 or 3 really good CEOs. I read a ton of books and I said, here's what we're going to do, guys. And I said, I'm the sales and marketing guy, but we have a technical infrastructure. We have support, right? Because basically your business is really supporting your customers more than anything.
Yes.
I've never run finance before. I actually don't even like finance. I said, so I don't really know what I'm doing in those areas. So I need your help. I said, but I know where I want us to go. I have an idea of where I'd like us to go. And let's discuss, debate, and decide that, right? I want your input on that and make sure I'm on the same thing. And then I said, I want each of you, because there were 4 guys that reported into me. So I ran marketing, another guy ran sales, someone ran the technical infrastructure, one ran support, and then I actually ran finance as well. And then we had like the product guy. So I said, I need each of you to draw me the map from where we are today to where that point is that we want to get to in the future. Yeah. And then we're going to work together every week, going to work together and figure out how to get there. So that's what we did. And it was phenomenal. It worked tremendously well. Cool. We doubled the business about I left in 18 months, but within 2 years, we doubled the size of the business. I didn't lose 1 employee.
Nice.
We increased the average order size by 30%. Just the numbers were great. I did Net Promoter wasn't really a thing yet. It was just starting to become a thing. But I said, look, I need our customers to tell us how we're doing, because we're basically a support organization. It's really always service. So we need them to tell us. So I said, every quarter, we're going to have them grade us from 1 to 5. So the first time I did it was, of course, the first quarter I took over, which was a disaster. So the bar was set really low, which was cool. So we got a 2.9 out of 5, which is a 58% approval rate. That is a horrible approval rate.
Yeah.
When I left, it was 4.6.
Nice.
18 months later. So the stats were great. But the best part was 2 of the guys who worked for me they weren't young, but they were inexperienced managers. They hadn't really run bigger teams before. And they said to me basically the same thing, which was, I just want you to know the thing that you made me do, that roadmap you made me do, I hated it. It was really, really hard, right? But I'm so glad you made me do it, because now I know how to do it, right? I taught them how to fish. Yes. And I took that and I said, I want that again. I want to be able to help people like that again. And that's what I did. 5 years ago, I pulled it out and said, okay, now's the time to make a decision. Do I do 11th startup or do I do this? And so I decided to become a coach. And that's sort of it's probably a quarter answer to your nickel question there, but that's sort of how it happened.
I love that. This is a cool story. Now, your roadmap that you're talking about, is that what you currently use for your coaching clients too?
No, it's actually, what I did is a fraction of what I did then is a fraction what I do now. What I did then was I basically built, if you're familiar with EOS or traction.
Yes.
I basically did that. Because I know Gino and I have a whole bunch of friends who are traction coaches and stuff.
Yeah.
I did that. It was just mostly execution. But now I do a much larger framework. It's based upon scaling up, if you're familiar with scaling up.
Yeah.
It's not quite scaling up. It's probably 60 to 70% scaling up. I'm no longer in the organization, but I got certified as scaling up. And then a bunch of us broke off and did something called 3HAG, which is a better strategy side of scaling up, I think. Okay. So I do that. And I have some of my own stuff. I'm a bit of a neuroscience geek. So I shove a lot of neuroscience in what I do, because people are crazy and you need to understand how the brain works to really lead well. If you don't, you're at a disadvantage, because we're all a little nuts. You got to really understand that. So I sort of weave a little bit of my own stuff in there. But I'm mostly, I think they call it collating.
Okay.
Or no, not collating. What's the word? I'm using other people's stuff. There's a better word. I can't remember what it is now.
Yes, it's like a broker of information type thing.
Yeah, this starts with a C. I can't believe I'm totally blanking on it. I've said this word like 1,000 times and I can't remember what it is now.
So obviously, like, you've been really good with your business, your coaching business, and you're helping other people to become successful, because that's really, what has been your biggest struggle with taking this on?
So the first two years were really hard. So I did relatively well. I'm a 1%er, right? But when I decided to start my own company, I had no clients. I really had no background in it whatsoever, other than my sort of experience. But I wasn't a coach. I mean, I was coaching at the example I gave you, but I wasn't using any techniques. I was just sort of going with gut and intuition.
Yes.
So I had no clients, and
Wow.
so we qualified for 2 years for basically a poverty level health insurance here in Massachusetts, because I made money. My first year, I made $30,000, of which 18 of it was unemployment insurance.
Wow.
So I made $12,000, which was
hard.
about a tenth. It's less than a tenth of what I usually make just in salary, forget commission. So it was not good. And my daughter's 21. So she was, when I did 5 years ago, she was entering college in a year or two. So I didn't have the money for it. So I went through a ton of money, and I had to figure out, what I wanted. And I actually turned away a lot of business because I decided I wanted to do this. Everything that I teach, I do myself. So I eat my own dog food, and you have to understand your core customer. You have to understand what they care about, who they are, what they're made of. And if they're not that person, you shouldn't work with them. And I would have people come to me and say, "Oh, I want you to work with me. I want you to do this." And I say, "No." And behind my breath, I'm like, "You're kind of a jerk. I'm not working with you. I want to work with people that pass the airport test." Have you ever heard of the airport tests?
No.
Like you get stuck in,
Tell me about that. You get
stuck in the airport for like 4 or 5 hours. You would love to be with this person. It would be like, you'd look forward to hanging out with this person for 4 or 5 hours. That's the airport test. If you can pass that, then they're probably a good client. Because I become friends. I'm friends now with some of my clients.
Yes.
We talk about our kids, and we give big hugs, and so it becomes personal. And so I want them to be, I wouldn't say we're friends, but like that.
Yes. Yeah. No, I completely understand. I 100% agree with you. And I was once where I had to fire a client because I literally could not work with this person. It was just absolutely horrific. And I've learned my lesson since then. And I coach because I've got a marketing agency, and I help businesses with their marketing stuff, etc. And I've turned it into a coaching business, same as you, like with the coaching stuff. And so the biggest thing that I like try to drill into their heads is really understand your client, because that is the core of your business. Can we dive a little bit into that, Bill? Because you seem very clever and familiar with that. So how do you do your client avatar? How do you niche down on that?
Yes. So I've been studying this for at least 20 years.
Yes.
Because as a startup, you have to really understand, you have to figure out the problem we're solving. So you have to understand your customer and really.
Correct.
So I got relatively good. So I'm a Steve Blank fan. I don't like his writing. I think he's a horrible writer, but I love listening to him talk, and his concepts are great. I'm also a fan of Jobs to be Done. If you're familiar with Jobs to be Done, and I've actually become friends with Bob Mesta, who he and Clayton Christensen were really one of the first people to do Jobs to be Done about 30 years ago. So I sort of take those concepts, and the general concept, for those of you in the audience who don't understand what that is, it's in essence, you have to interrogate your client, your potential customer, to understand what they really want, because they don't know. They'll tell you, but they're almost always wrong. And then you have to sort of understand what progress they're trying to make, and then who they are. So for me, it's actually on my website. You can see it. And but the essence of it is, I need a humble leader who is a lifelong learner and is comfortable constantly challenging the status quo. If they are those 3 things, I can work with them. If they are only 2 of those things, I probably can't, because I'm a bit of an iconoclast. I come in and I say stuff that like, "Oh, I didn't know that," or "That's weird. I never heard of that." Like people will say, the big thing is, you need to give people feedback. And I say, no, you don't. People hate feedback. It's actually done really badly. And it's only one of many tools that you have at your disposal. But there are so many people that I know that you must give feedback to your people. And I say, no, you don't. And like, what do you mean? I said, well, let me give you an example. I said, let's do this. Let's, there's this guy like Jeff Hunter, and he says, you have to set the standard. And if you set the standard, you never have to give feedback, because you say, like, let's say there's a meeting standard, right? We have a meeting standard, which is we do meetings this way, right? And there are like 6 steps to our meeting. That's the standard. And we run the meeting this way. And then the meeting, it didn't go that well. And so you as the boss was listening in, and you go to the person, you said, how do you think that went? And they'd say, whatever. And if they're not delusional, they're like, well, that was okay. And okay, I said, well, what really well in that? And what didn't go really well? Yeah. And did we meet the standard? I said, and they say, what's the standard for the meeting, right? And you have them sort of walk through the steps of the standard and say, okay, which one of those do you think we should improve on? Okay, let's do that. And they'll say 1 or 2 suggestions. Terrific. If you think there's something you really need to tell them, then you tell them. But most of the time, it's better just let them drive it, because it's so much better when they come up with the idea. They're much more likely to follow through if it's their idea. Yeah. And then you say, great, and let's work together until we get this meeting all the way to the standard. Yes. Now, I helped them. I didn't give them any feedback at all. I didn't tell them what to do. But I did the work up front as a leader to say, this is our standard for meetings. This is our standard for feedback. This is our standard for strategy, execution. I mean, you have to do all that work up front, which is what I do for a living. Then you say, great, let's make sure that we meet the standard. And if you do that well, you will rarely have to give anyone feedback ever.
That's actually a really clever way to do it, though, because then people don't feel like you are pressuring them into something that they're not comfortable in executing. So
yeah, and very often the people help you make the standard, so they're already bought into the standard.
That's true.
Not always, but you want them to buy in. Yeah. So that's sort of what happens with me is I come at things. So I'm a scientist by, like, my brain is scientific. I apply the scientific method to anything, and I apply it to business. And one of the things you'll see in my bio is I think there's a meaningful gap between what science knows and business does. Yes. We do business on conventional wisdom all the time, and conventional wisdom is wrong most of the time, but it's acceptable.
So how did you decide to work with science? How did that come about?
With science?
Introducing science.
So I was a sales guy. And so when I first started working, I was 23 and I just fell into sales. My uncle was a VC, and he just took me under his wing and said, let me give you a bunch of informational interviews. I wasn't really doing job interviews. He said, just meet a whole bunch of people. And one of the people liked me, and I went in through the second in command in this company. It was like 400 people in this organization. And I came in through the number 2 guy because he was friends with my uncle. Yes. And then he liked me in like 15 minutes. He sent me to the person who worked to him, and he liked me. And then he sent me the person that worked for him. And I got down to like 4 layers in the first day. And all of a sudden they're like, okay, why don't you come back for an interview? I'm like, okay. And I didn't realize it, but I got the job, and everyone I worked with, so I was like inside sales. I was like a peon. Everyone I worked with hated me because I didn't come in their way, or I came in through the top, and I didn't even realize it. I finally became friends with the guy who became my boss, and he told me like 2 years later, oh yeah, we all hated you. Like, oh, I didn't know that. They hit it really well. But anyway, so now I totally lost my train of thought. So I was really bad at sales. Yeah. But I'm generally personable. I'm pretty smart. I knew my stuff, and I was really bad at it. And like, why? Everything they say, you must know your product. You must be able to be personable, and people must like you. I'm like, well, I get all those things, but I still suck at this. So I asked myself, well, what is the essence of sales? And the essence of sales is you're helping someone else make a decision. That's decision making. Okay. What is decision making? How do people make decisions? Then I get into how does the brain make decisions? Yeah. And the brain makes decisions in a very specific way, and not the way we're ever taught. So I studied, I said, that's what I'm going to do. And I learned how the brain makes decisions. And what I found basically is that when we make a decision as human beings, the first part of our brain that lights up is the emotional centers. They used to call it the limbic system, but there's argument now that there's really not a system. It's a limbic system. It's all over the place, but it's the emotional centers of your brain, which means that you don't make a decision rationally. You make it emotionally first, and then you make up reasons after the fact.
Yes. And that's where the past remorse can come in, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, so this is sort of like the MasterCard thing with the priceless, right? It's all about
Yeah.
tugging at the heartstrings.
Yep.
So once I figured that out, I became the number 1 or number 2 salesperson everywhere I went.
That is
It was like a
amazing.
superpower, and I
Yeah.
could totally manipulate people if I wanted. I didn't, but it was like I could manipulate people easily.
Yes.
As soon as you figure out what they cared about, and then you focused on that, they're like, "Okay, I would like to give you my money." And it was hilarious, and I
How
taught
would-
all my salespeople that,
Yeah.
and you know, and generally we did generally well from that. So that's sort of how I got into science. And that was 25, so that was
Wow.
25 years ago. That's a
That's-
long time ago.
Yeah, that is.
Yeah.
Now, how does that science fit in then with NLP? Is that in cahoots with each other? Is that separate?
No, don't ask me about NLP.
Come on,
no.
Bill, share the golden nuggets.
So neurolinguistic programming is if you type in NLP and pseudoscience, it is all over the place.
Okay.
So the two guys that started, so I studied this because I thought it was cool. I'm like, oh, so I studied this 15 years ago, whenever.
Yeah.
And these two guys, so they wanted to sell books. They didn't want to understand really how stuff worked. They wanted to sell books. So what they did is they observed in some way, I don't know how they did this, but they observed psychologists and they watched what they did. And they said, oh, they seem to be, you know, they thought they saw something. And then they extrapolated from there. Now, the problem with NLP is some of the stuff that they have is correct. Anchoring, perspective taking, you know, a bunch of stuff, but a bunch of the other stuff they have is wrong, completely wrong. And I have a bunch of coaching friends that are in NLP. And I said, the problem I have with NLP is you don't know what's right and what is wrong. And a lot of what they have, like some of the things, I went to a 2.5-hour presentation of this woman, and some of the stuff she says is the science has been debunked for decades,
wow.
but they still keep using it, right? Because it works. It sounds, there's something called the expediency bias, right? Which is that if it sounds good, it's probably right.
Yes, I've heard that.
But often it is wrong. And NLP is full of that. So I'm a big fan of this group called the Neuro Leadership Institute. And they actually come from it at a scientific perspective. They say, oh, that happened. How did that happen? Where NLP says, oh, I'm going to assume that because it worked here, it's going to work there. And science is not an extrapolative medium.
Yes.
You have to prove it from a disinterested third party that it can be done again. And a lot of NLP cannot be reproduced at all by a third party.
Wow.
So sorry, but I'm just not a big fan of NLP.
Yeah, no, that's cool. I'm glad that you said that because I've always not been a fan either of NLP. And I've had coaches that approach me and say like, oh, come into my coaching program. I will help you with this and this. I've just never been interested in it. It's just never tickled me, you know, if I can put it like that. It's just not something that I've been keen on.
Yeah. And then they're connected to the Heart Math Institute, which is like Scientology. Go on their website. It's bizarre stuff, you know, aliens.
That is like a whole different level of weird.
Yeah. And they're connected.
Really? I didn't know that. That's freaky.
Yeah. I don't know how tight the connection is, but there's a lot of Heart Math Institute with NLP. And that scares me. I mean, NLP at least has some stuff that works. I don't think I believe anything that the Heart Math Institute talks about. And you know, they basically say you have 3 brains, right? You have this brain, you have the heart brain, you have the gut brain. And no, you don't. You have one brain. This brain makes all the decisions. You have neurons that are around your heart because your brain needs information. It's called interoperative information. You have extraoperative and interoperative, right? Extraoperative is your eyes, your smelling, your hearing, because your brain is in the dark silence. It is, and by the way, the last upgrade it had was either between 10 and 50,000 years ago. It is really old. It is working on some old software, which is why it fools you all the time. So, you know, they say, oh, you make decisions with your heart. You do not. You do not have a brain in your heart. You have 40,000 or so neurons that surround your heart, which is really important because, you know, your brain wants to keep your heart going because if it doesn't go, then you die.
Exactly.
And that's its job. Its job is to predict the future so you do not die. So it takes information. And what I love is I say, well, okay, there's 40,000 or so here, but you know how many neurons are in your gut? 100 million.
Goodness gracious.
I said, so basically your intestines are driving your decisions. Is that what you're telling me? Which is just insane. By that time, they're not too happy with me, and they usually leave the conversation.
That would be like some weird alien thing coming out, you know, at the end of it.
Yeah. Anyway,
So
Sorry, it's a touchy
no,
subject.
this is an awesome conversation, Bill. This is like so entertaining. What do you think has been the biggest thing that drove your success over the years?
So my brain is really good at puzzles.
Okay.
I can't really I could probably take some credit for it, but I think I was just born with this brain. I think part of it was sports. I think I played hockey from a very young age, and I still play hockey, and I can often predict with relatively good accuracy what's going to happen before it happens, because somehow it does this thing with patterns. So in startups, it's all about finding patterns. And so I think that's really helped me. In sales, it's about patterns. I'm much more empathetic and compassionate now, but I wasn't as a young salesperson.
Okay.
But I was sincere and earnest in my desire to help people. And they could see that. And I didn't know that was the emotional part, right? They liked me. They knew that I was actually trying to help them. And I didn't want to sell them something just to sell them something.
Exactly.
So I think that helped me a lot. So I had this little trick as a sales guy. And this is one of the things that I learned about decision-making. And I would do it every time, and it worked wonders. When I did it, and if we were right fit and I did this thing, I almost never lost.
Wow.
Right. Often I would find out that I wasn't a good fit and I would bail. But I rarely lost. And it was because I think they understood that I was sincere. So I would go into a sales meeting and I would say, okay, we're going to be here for an hour and a half. I said, and I would try to find what I call the bully with the juice. Right? Who's the bully with the juice in the meeting? The one, it's not always the one with the titles. Sometimes it's someone else, right? They often sit in different places. They're often sitting in a place of import and distribution so people can see them. So often you could sort of pick them out before you even heard them speak. But once you sort of went around the room, you could tell this guy's the one they're all listening to. It's not always one, or this woman. It's not always a guy. So I would make sure that I focused on that person, but I did it with everyone. And I would ask one question. I said, so describe for me the ideal outcome of this meeting. What have you gotten from me that will help you either to make a decision or move your decision process forward? And I went around the room and I wrote everything down.
That is such a cool framework to put in place.
Yeah. And then I said, so this is what I said. Did I miss anything? No. Okay, great. And then I completely tailored my pitch to everything they said. And then at the end, if they missed something that I knew that might be interesting to them, I'll say, you know what, I covered everything, but there was one thing that a lot of people like you really like about what we do. And do you mind if I share that with you? And so they felt acknowledged, right? They felt valued. They felt like I was listening. And at the end of the meeting, I went through the list and I said, okay, you asked me for this. How did I do? Did I miss anything? And I went through the checklist. And it's like, it was magical, totally magical. And so I've applied that to most of what I do as a coach, et cetera. So I'd say that was sort of the impetus of how I became successful, whatever you want to call successful.
Yeah, well, that's actually very smart, because as a coach myself, I always look at patterns like you do, patterns and frameworks, and, going to see what actually, just see what other people do and how you can implement it in your own business, and not necessarily doing what they do, but just the concepts, because it really works. So what are you currently offering in your business? So you've got your coaching program, right? So what is your current offering, and how do you help your people in your business at the moment?
I do three things. So my primary business is coaching.
Yes.
And I work just with a handful of clients. Mostly of them are in Massachusetts. I do have one that's a complete remote company, and they fly me to different parts of the United States once a quarter, and I hang out with them for like a day and a half.
That's awesome.
And one of them is in Maine. I think I have 6 clients now. And so I basically teach them this framework. And for the most part, I teach them what I know. And if they try to veer me off track, I almost always say no. When I first started, it's one of the struggles I had when I first started, I would talk to a lot of my coaches, and a lot of them treat it like a consulting thing. And so they'd go in and they'd say, oh, what's your problem? And they would figure out the problem. And they would say, oh, I can help you solve that problem. But I would start doing that. And then I would find out later on that they didn't know what their problem was. They were describing a symptom to a problem. So I stopped asking.
Yes.
I would just say, what's your biggest growth? What's your biggest barrier to growth? And I would have them describe that to me. Because often when they describe the problem, they actually are telling you the solution.
That is true.
And I'm thinking, well, if you know the solution, why do you have me here? Right? So clearly there's something wrong. So I just stopped asking. And I said, here's my framework. Here's what I do. I would always explain them up front. I do go through a 3-step sales process. And I'm basically going for the no the whole time. But if they get through the whole thing, and my last thing is I spend 90 minutes with them and their team, and I walk them through an exercise And so they can see my style. I can see how they interact with each other. I can see how that leader treats everyone.
Yes.
And if he treats them like crap, I'm out. Like, I can't help you. You're the genius with 1,000 helpers, and you're not going to listen to me.
Yes.
And all my business is referral. So you're not going to be happy. You're going to either fire me or I'm going to fire you with less than a year. Said, so I'm not, and I've probably not brought on as many customers as I brought on. And I think I've had 12 or 13 customers over 5 years. So that's sort of that's what I teach them. It's 3 steps. One is that performance is a team sport.
Okay.
We talk about so scaling up is about people. He has people, strategy, execution, and cash. And I think he's right, but he's not completely right. I think it's team first. Individuals are fine, but the teams do almost everything. According to Marcus Buckingham, teams do 83% of the work, or 80 some odd percent of what happens. That's a lot. And we don't teach people how to run a good team. It's a skill. To run is to attract, craft, build, and grow a team. That is a skill. If you have that skill, you're gold. But we don't teach people how to do it. It's like parenting. It's like, you throw them in, it's like, oh, just do that. And some people are good parents and some people aren't. It's just the way it is. We're not all good parents because we had kids. So performance is a team sport. Then you must treat your business as a system. And mostly it's around strategy and execution. So I think Vern's got it right at strategy and execution, but they're not separate. They are together because you execute your strategy. Yeah. Right. And I would say that to leaders I would ask them that all the time. And I would say, what's your biggest problem, barrier to growth? And they almost always gave me an operational problem. We're not hitting our goals. People aren't doing the right things. They're missing deadlines. It's all operational. Yeah. And I said, well, that's execution. And I would ask, well, what are they executing on? And they look at me like, what do you mean? I said, no, you're executing on something, right? I mean, and they would say, oh, well, we're executing on the plan. Well, how did you come up with the plan? And I'm trying to get them to strategy, right? The strategy drives the plan, which drives the execution. Yeah. And I said, so here's what I said. So if it's really the strategy that's really driving the execution, I said, what would happen if I came in on Monday morning at your 10 o'clock sales meeting, 10 o'clock leadership meeting, and ask everyone to write down their version of the current company strategy, and then they would all read it out loud to each other. What do you think would happen? And almost everybody laughs or smiles and like, oh, it'd be all over the place. I said, yeah. I said, so maybe they're executing really well on their version of the strategy. Yes. So your job is to get them all literally and figuratively on the same page. Yeah. But then maybe execution still could be a problem. Yeah. But execution is the simplest of all the things I do. It's just 3 things. It's setting the priorities right that are cohesive, measuring them in meaningful ways, and meeting about them. Meetings are actually the things that move your business forward, and we suck at meetings. We are horrible at meetings. In my book, there's a stat that says in the US alone, we waste $37 billion each year in unproductive meetings. $37 billion. That's crazy. Many countries don't make $37 billion, and we're just wasting it in the United States. It's crazy.
Because people have meetings, but they never get to the actual solution in the meeting that the meeting is supposed to be about. Yeah.
And everything that really happens in meeting is not in the meeting. It's like it's the passing by in the hall or like it's amazing. Yeah. So let's do the second one. The last thing is, if you really want to grow your company, cash is your primary financial growth metric. It is the only thing that will not lie to you. Profit can lie to you. Revenue will definitely lie to you. Revenue is about vanity. It's about ego. Yes. It shouldn't be the way you drive your business, because it leads you in the wrong direction and you make bad decisions. Yes. It should be about cash. Yes. Because if you want to grow, you have to pay for it in front of growth. And that costs money. You can borrow money, but now you're giving away your company to someone else, most likely. Yeah. Yeah. So those are 3 things. Performance is a team sport. Treat your business as a cohesive system, and cash is the primary financial growth metric. That's what I teach. I go into a lot more depth, but that's
yes, obviously, yeah. But that's really good, because those are 3 very, very important steps in any business. So yeah, exactly. That's really cool. So you've written a book. Can you tell us a little bit about the book that you've written?
Yeah. So I call myself an accidental author. I never set out to write a book. I didn't want to write a book. A number of my friends in the coaching world say, well, you have to write a book. I'm like, I don't want to write a book. It's all been said. Yeah. I mean, we're just repeating stuff that's 100 years old, right? We got McGregor, Deming, Drucker, Schein. These guys are 70, 80 years old, right? Years ago, when these things, management science is 100 years old. And now we've got Collins and Porter and Lencioni and Sinek and Buckingham, and they're all saying the same thing that those guys said. They're just saying it in their way. We're not actually saying anything new. I said, so there's tons of books. But my coaching peers and my clients said that, you know what, that's true, but the way you come at it is different.
Yeah.
And I get the best compliment I could ever have had from one of my clients who said to me, Bill is the best value per word of any coach or consultant we have ever hired.
Wow.
And they were in their
powerful.
40s.
That's powerful.
And I'm like, wow. And I said, Eric, can you write that down? And I want to put it on my website. And it's on my website. It's like front and center in my testimonials. Because that's what I want. I don't want to pontificate. I know I'm on a podcast, I'm talking a lot, but I don't want to do that. My job is to help you figure out your own thing.
Yeah.
So that was terrific. So the book is about really applying what I would call the Pareto principle to business. So the 80-20 rule. And my subtitle is called The Vital Few Steps That Take the Guesswork Out of Growth. And the Pareto principle is a law. It's called the law of the vital few.
Okay.
So that's what I do. As I say, hey, there's a whole bunch of, I mean, you're a coach, you know, there's like 100 or 200 exercises you can pull from, but man, that's confusing.
Too much.
It's just like 4 or 5 things. These are the big, huge knobs. If you move these knobs, you'll get further faster. And so that's what my book is about. It's a DIY book. You don't need me. I tried to write it in such a way that you can do it yourself. And you can go to my website. There are 25 exercises, which again, I tried to write, you know, it's hard because I have the curse of knowledge, right? I tried to write it as if I didn't know anything, like the Joy of Cooking cookbook, right? You know, do this first and do that first. And so you can do that. So it's designed to have you at least get 70, 80% of the way there. And then you can use little tiny knobs, right, to get you a little to your closer to 100%. So that's what the book is about. It's about those 3 things I talked about: performance and system and cash.
That's really, really cool. I like that. I'm going to get my hands on your book. It sounds fantastic. So, Bill, how do you set goals? You see, I've got a big sign, #goals, behind me. Now, this was a joke that got born out of my coaching. And so it just became a thing, and it became a theme on my podcast. So how do you set goals?
Yeah, so I do it completely differently now than I did before. But so I first started, I combined Stephen Covey and Hiram Smith, which eventually became Franklin Covey. But when I first started doing it, they weren't Franklin Quest or whatever it's called.
Okay.
And one of those guys, so Stephen Covey is the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. That's like a huge book. And
I've got it. Yes.
Yeah, I don't think he's alive anymore, but I think his son is still doing it. But I then said, and I was really good at it, executing, but then I said, well, they have to be cohesive. So I start with my vision. What do I want to do? And my vision is manifests itself in my BHAG, which is a 10 to 30 year goal. And I want to touch 1 million lives.
It's beautiful.
I'm at 30,000 right now, or so 35,000. So I got a long way to go. And that drives me. It's like, how am I going to touch, how am I going to touch those lives? And I'm not going to do it coaching. I'll never get there coaching one client at a time. So then that drives my 3-year goal. And I have sort of financial metrics. So at the end of 3 years, I want to make $1 million. So at the end of 2023, I want to be at least on track to make $1 million. That's my sort of financial goal. If I don't make it, that's okay. But that's sort of where I'm headed. Yeah. And I don't want to hire anyone. I want to make $1 million and have 1 employee. And so I said, how would I do that? And I know how to do that. I have a plan on how I can do that. Yeah. It's hard to execute, and I got a ways to go. Yes. And then that drives my 1-year goals, which then of course I think I have 3 or 4 of those. And then I have quarterly goals, and each of them ties up to the next. And then I have my to-do list, which then I say, okay, I have A's and B's. A is important and not urgent, and B's are important and urgent. Yeah. And then I put a number, and I do 1, 2, 3, and I just go through those things, and they all have to tie up. Yeah. They have to make sense to me to tie up. So I'm only doing what I believe is the most important and most urgent things first. And then I try to shrink that. I try to have very few A's. I don't want important and urgent things. I want to work on important and not urgent things. I think I did that wrong. I think A is important and urgent, and B is important and not urgent. So eventually I try to get like 1 or 2 A's, because I don't want to be doing important and urgent. So my B list is really long. And one of them was to write a book. And actually I might write another book, who knows, at some point. And I didn't write my book. I hired someone. I'm a horrible writer. So I hired somebody to do it. And she did an awesome job. She was tremendous. I could never have written that book. I wrote about 20% of it, but she did a great job. So that's how I do my goal. And I could show you, I have it all written down. I have it, it's all in I've Evernote, and I have it all there. And I just try to do very few things. I don't do very much during the day. I don't want to be busy.
Yeah.
I worked 60 days last year. That's it.
Wow. That's
And
impressive.
I made more money than 98% of the United States.
Nice. That is really awesome.
Yeah. Because I'm following what I do. Few things truly matter. What are the few things that really matter? Focus on those. And my business, so I have quadrupled my annual fee in 5 years.
That's really cool.
So I only need 3 customers to make a really good living. Like a really good living, like a 1% living.
Yeah. So that's the way to live, though. But that's the way to live. That's like really the work-life balance that people would talk about, because
By the
people.
way, and I think work-life balance is a joke. There's no such thing as work-life balance.
Oh, it's across the world. It's exactly the same. People would tell me, "Look, I've got the
there's
work-life
only
balance."
one thing. There's life.
Yes.
And there's life. That's it. There's no parallel between work and life.
There's no balance.
Life. And guess what? Work is part of life. Right? Yep. So there's no balance. It's have a really good life and figure out how to balance your personal life, your professional life, your religious life, your whatever. Yes. All of those things are part of life.
Yeah.
That's what you want to do. It's nothing to do with, I think work-life balance is poorly named. Not on the same level.
I agree. I 100% agree with you. Yeah. Yes.
So I want to live a really good life. And that's what I'm trying to do.
Well, that's what you only have one, so make it count.
Right, exactly. I'm only here for another 30 years, and I'm going to take full advantage.
Yeah, just make it count. Exactly. So this podcast, Bill, is for people that they're either not just for them, but it's a big chunk of the audience of people that they're getting inspired by the episodes. And it is about also inspiring them to start a business or potentially just grow their business when they're stuck. And so a lot of people are stuck in the businesses, or they just haven't really taken the step to start a business. What advice would you have for somebody that is in that situation?
So somebody who wants to start a business?
Yes. So they're just sitting on the fence. They're not really sure if they should do this.
Oh yeah, same thing. Solve a problem worth solving. That's the first thing you have to do. And then solve it in a way that people will pay you enough money to make a real business out of it, whether it's a lifestyle business or a growth business. Mm-hmm. And this is Steve Blank, right? I love this guy Ash Moria, who is kind of a Steve Blank parallel guy. He's written a lot of the lean books. Okay. Not Eric Ries, who wrote Lean Startup, but he's got a bunch of lean books. And he says, life is too short to build something nobody wants.
Amen to that.
So really figure it out. And I say to founders all the time, I said, do not fall in love with your idea. It is almost always wrong. And it's not what you end up doing. But if you fall in love with it, you'll focus on trying to make it happen. You should focus on the problem. Fall in love with the problem. And you'll have a much better chance of creating a business that works. Now, it's not guaranteed. It still may be a bad problem, but you'll get there faster, and then you'll pivot to something else. And then it also should tie with something that you love. If you do something where you can make money, but you hate it every day, what a horrible way to live, right? So you should love what you do, or at least most of it. Yeah. And days will fly by. And guess what? If you're solving a problem it'll grow on its own, because you're going to be really good at it and be productive. People are going to, again, back to that emotion, they're going to see the excitement in you and the passion in you. And they're like, they won't even know it, but they're like, I want to give you my money. I want to help you be successful. So that's what you got to do. And the only other thing I say is, do not run out of money. You only need to do 2 things: solve a problem we're solve in a way that happens, and do not run out of money. Everything else, core values, core purpose, all these wonderful things we talk about, ignore them at the beginning. They're just going to happen naturally. Now, once you get through that knothole, then go back and revisit and make sure you don't lose your culture. You don't lose your identity, because growth for growth's sake is the ideology of a cancer cell. I didn't say that. I wish I did. It's such a great saying.
It's a really good quote.
Cells often kill their host. Mm-hmm. And most businesses die. So in the United States, you only have a 50% chance of making it 5 years. 50-50. Look at the stats. The stats, and the Bureau of Labor Statistics and the Small Business Administration have the same stats. And it gets worse. You have a 16% chance of lasting 25 years. So it just keeps going down. And by the way, those are the ones that die. Yeah. So that's easy, because you're either dead or you're not. But then there's a whole bunch of people, a slew of people that aren't dead, that are struggling mightily. Very few companies thrive. Like probably, I don't even know what the number is because it's hard to know, but I would probably say less than 10% of all companies are thriving. Are Southwest Airlines or a red balloon, right? In Australia. And I don't know any New Zealand companies, sorry. Apple, IKEA, these
Yes.
companies that are just thriving businesses, there are very, very few of them. But there doesn't need to be. That's the reason I started doing what I was doing, because I think it's a shame. Really good ideas, really good businesses, and really good people fail or struggle for completely preventable reasons. They are completely preventable. But we don't take enough time to figure it out. We're too busy going, we're too busy doing.
Yes.
And then all of a sudden we stick our head up and like, uh-oh, or COVID happens, or 2008 happens, or 9/11 happens, and we're out of business. Because guess what? We don't have any money left. Because we grew wide instead of deep.
Yes. Yeah.
It's crazy. So that's what I'm trying. That's my goal. That's my million. I want to try to touch 1 million people and say, I call myself a pragmatic Simon Sinek, because I'm an optimist, but I'm also an operator. And I love Simon Sinek, but he doesn't really tell you what to do. He inspires you. He's like, oh, you have to start with your why. And I'm like, yeah, but how do you get to your why? It's like, so I talk people through. It's actually not about your why. It's about your when. I think you have to think back, when I started this company, what was going on in my life? What drove me to want to do this? And it's usually a struggle you had or a really close person to you had. And you were saying, hey, I think I could do that better.
Yes.
That usually gets you to your why, is when you think when, more often than when you try to think why. So I think I'm better than Simon on that one, but he's got a little more cachet than I do.
Now, have you heard Dean? Do you know Dean Graziosi? You should.
I know the name. I don't know much about it.
So I've got one of his books there. So he wrote the book Millionaire Success Habits. So he's like I think he's a billionaire, if not close to being a billionaire. Yeah. And so he's doing this exercise, or he's done it in the past, and he's got like videos on it, and it's actually in his book. And it's called 7 Levels Deep. And what that basically is you ask yourself with somebody 7 times, why do you do this? So if you're saying, why have you...
Toyota.
Yes. So have you heard of that? And does that work? Because I've done that and it worked for me, but it doesn't work for everybody.
I love this. So he didn't come up with that.
Yeah, no, he didn't.
This is Toyota. This is what Toyota has been doing for 100 years. It's called the 5 Why. They call it the 5 Whys. Yeah. Right. He just decided to make it 7, and you got the six levels of strategy and the 7 levers of this. It's like, it's all the same. Everyone's just putting their own spin on it. But yes, what you want to get to, it doesn't matter how many times you do it. You just want to get to the essence of when you can't come up with an answer anymore. Yeah. And you've either saved the world or just before you're saving the world. That's probably your why. Right. Because if you're making ice cream, you're probably not saving the world. So it's probably the thing in front of the saving the world that is your why. Yeah. And that's what you want to do. Yeah. And that's awesome. So that's what I do with folks. And you don't have to say why. You can also say, why is that important? How is that relevant? You can do different versions of it. Yes. And you're just getting people to get underneath. So I completely agree with this concept, but his method is old.
Yeah. Yeah. And this is the thing, because people do evolve in some ways. Yeah.
Yeah. But it's a hard exercise to do, because you're not really pressed often to try to come up with that. And I have clients I took one client of mine, it took them 9 months to get to their core purpose, which is really the why. Yeah. Right. And so begin with why. I call it core purpose. I know that Simon Sinek calls it, with your why. He has the why, that's the beginning, and the just cause which is the end. Yeah. Right. The just cause. So in the United States, our just cause is a more perfect union. Right. That's what we're trying to do. We'll never get there. Mm-hmm. And by the way, recently we've gone backwards tremendously, but hopefully we're taking some steps forward, getting back towards heading there. That's your just cause, right? And so I like those bookends that he has, right? Mm-hmm. But your why is, why did I start? What drove me? Mm-hmm. What was the thing inside of me? It has nothing to do with money. It has to do with we love purpose. Our brain loves purpose. If you can give our brain purpose, it will do unimaginable things, wonderful feats. Yeah. Without you ever asking the human being to do it, because it's like, I want to do this. I want to help you. I'm in. I believe what you believe. I want to make it happen. So yes, I completely agree in the concept. From a neuroscience perspective, it is dead on. So we as human beings, I've learned, have 2 competing things going on. Mm-hmm. Is that we want to be part of something bigger than ourselves, mm-hmm. but we also want to think we are unique, which are completely against each other. Yeah. But if you can make that happen, then you have solved the problem. So who's done that? Apple has done that, right? Because Apple people thought they were unique, but they were in a group. People with tattoos, emo. Pick your like unique thing, that's why they work. That's why they're so passionate about what they do,
Mm.
because they've been able to resolve this conflict between being part of something bigger than yourself, but also feeling like you're unique. If you can do that and give that to people, it's magical, just totally magical.
I love that. Bill, this has been fantastic. I really appreciate your time. You have shared so many golden nuggets with the audience, and I can't even wait to re-listen to some of those golden nuggets because they've just been so fantastic. I really appreciate your time. Thank you so much. We will drop the links below to Bill's book and also to, everything Bill related, so you guys can go and check him out if you feel like you can use his services. Bill, this has been fantastic. Thank you so very much for your time.
Thank you, Joy. Appreciate being on. Appreciate you having me.
Cheers.